This session is titled 21st Century Policing Report Initiative, Institute for Polarities of Democracy and Noble. And at this time, I'll turn things over to the presenters.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this session. What you're going to hear today is an initiative that was developed as a result of some work that Dr. Benet and I did working with the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. So if you start with the next slide, please, we'll start with the origins of polarities of democracy, and Dr. Benet will take us through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. The polarities of democracy is a theory that I developed through my doctoral and postdoctoral research at the University of Toronto. It followed a career of about 40 years in public service and social justice work. And even though I had a lot of great individual successes, I was continually frustrated by an inability to address the vast disparities that exist as a result of structural racism, structural problems. And I was looking for how we could make the promise of democracy a reality for all people. And so in conducting my research, I began with using Dr. Barry Johnson's polarity thinking as my conceptual framework. Dr. Johnson tells us that there are two major kinds of thinking, either or thinking and both and thinking. Either or thinking, we tend to learn from the very beginning of problem solving. This is how we solve problems. But sometimes there are problems that can't be solved. They go on forever because a polarity exists. And when a polarity exists, it requires both and thinking. Now, let me give you an example of what Dr. Johnson is talking about, and then I'll get into my theory. So as an example, I can make an either or decision if I want to try to run a marathon. But however, the minute I make that either or decision, now a polarity comes into play. And that polarity is rest and exercise. You can't run a marathon without both. And when a polarity exists, both poles have both positive and negative aspects. And so if you over-focus on one pole to the neglect of the other pole, you're not effectively leveraging that polarity. So if I want to run a marathon, and if you're like me and you're a couch potato, and all you do is rest, now you're never going to be able to run a marathon. But on the other hand, if you only exercise and don't allow your body the time to recuperate, rejuvenate, and restore itself, you're never running a marathon either. So we need either or thinking to decide, yes, I want to run a marathon, and we need both and thinking to manage and leverage that pair of rest and exercise. Next slide, please. So from my research, I determined that there are 10 values that are essential to achieve democracy. Freedom and authority, justice and due process, diversity and equality, human rights and communal obligations, and participation and representation. Now, each one of these 10 values has both positive and negative aspects, and they exist as these 5 polarity pairs. So first, we have to maximize the positive aspects of all 10 of these poles while minimizing the negative aspects. Next slide. Next, thank you. And it gets a little more complicated because each of the polarities of democracy pairs are interrelated with the other pairs, which creates some alterity, which is a system of 2 or more interdependent polarity pairs. And to seek greater democratization, we need to not only leverage these pairs to maximize the positive aspects of each pole and minimize the negative aspects of each pole, but also recognize how the pairs are interrelated in any specific circumstances. Now, as of 2022, there have been about 19 doctoral dissertations completed at Walden University that have used the polarities of democracy as a theoretical framework. And it's now in conjunction with the Institute for Polarities of Democracy and our work with Noble, the theory is being used around the world to try to build healthy, sustainable, and just communities. And so with that, I think I can add more later if needed. But right now, let me turn it back to Dr. Joseph McMillan to talk about how the polarities of democracy theory and the Institute is working with Noble, to a national organization of Black law enforcement executives, to address police transformation in America.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benet. A little bit about myself. I'm a retired federal law enforcement senior executive with about 42 years of experience, both in policing as well as military service, so the public and military service. Also happen to be a past national president for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, which the acronym is Noble. I'm a Walden contributing faculty member in the School of Criminal Justice. I'm also, I used Dr. Benet's theory, the polarities of democracy theory, for my own dissertation work here at Walden in looking at how we go about managing youth firearm violence or homicides, if you would, in urban areas. Additionally, I'm a current fellow with the Institute of Polarities for Democracy. So as you can see from this slide, what we're going to be talking about today is this initiative that we embarked on with Noble. The tenets of the polarities of democracy is basically that they are values-based. And from that perspective, we're looking at Noble's mission. There's something I want to focus in on there, relative to being the conscience of law enforcement. So as a part of Noble's mission, we view ourselves as being able to address issues from that perspective as being the conscience of law enforcement. Occasionally, incidents may arise across the country internationally where people may not, or institutions may not want to touch on for a variety of reasons. But by being the conscience of law enforcement affords the organization the ability to be very forward-leaning on a variety of things that are impacting communities across this country. So right after the George Floyd incident, Dr. Benet and I and others had a conversation, and Dr. Benet and I said, and I approached him, I said, I think we can use this theoretical framework, if you would, to address some things that Noble is being called upon to address on a much broader basis, especially with the George Floyd incident. So what we wanted to do was apply the theories, if you would, of the polarities of democracy and other aligned theories like critical race theories to 21st century policing. A lot of conversation, if you would, around the last couple of years on reimagining policing, reimagining public safety. Well, as I stated very early, when you look at the various tenets of the various pairs, they're value-based in and of itself. And so if we're going to look at reimagining policing in America, it needs to come from that type of a perspective. So we said we can take the tenets, if you would, of the 21st Century Policing Report and analyze and assess the policing culture as it's looking at this cultural transformation. The industry post-George Floyd talking about going and transitioning from that of a warrior to a guardian. There's definitely a time and place for each of those perspectives, but as an industry, we need to relook and rethink about what the impact of policing is. In America, it's talking about reimagining that. So Noble was being called upon in this transformational effort to look at things like the Justice and Policing Act by Congress and other structural and systemic racism and underlying issues that really impacted our country from a vast array of disparities and inequities that were existent in America. Next slide, please. So we structured our review on what was known as the 21st Century Policing Report. And that report was actually implemented or came into being approximately mid-2015 timeframe. And as a part of that, it was under the former President Barack Obama's administration that the report came into existence. And it was taking a holistic view, if you would, of the industry of policing. And there were 6 pillars that came out of that great body of work. So to pull the work together, practitioners, academics, activists, they all came, and President Obama brought them all to the table. And there are a significant amount of listening sessions, if you would, across the United States as to what policing need to look like in the United States if it were being reimagined, reviewed. So what does 21st century policing look like? So we wanted to use that report because we saw that report pretty much like the blueprint of good policing in this country. And we wanted to use that body of work in alignment with the Polarities of Democracy value sets. So approaching Noble, we actually engaged with a memorandum of understanding between the Institute and the organization, and said we wanted to do some surveys and some additional reviews. So initially we went out to Noble's chief executives and the CEOs in Noble, those individuals that are police chiefs, superintendents, sheriffs, deputy chiefs of police, command level individuals. We wanted them to weigh in on a series of questions that we were asking relative to the 21st century policing report. And so we sent that survey out initially, like I said, to the CEOs, and you see the response right there. Noble having a membership base of approximately 1,500 to 2,000 personnel. We did get about 235 responses from the CEOs for about a 15% response, 15.6% response rate, and a slightly lower number for the general membership, because we did a separate link for them. And both of those links were sponsored and supported by Walden University. So the Center for Social Change actually developed, working with myself, Dr. Benet, and others, the survey instrument, and then they were able to export it so that the results would go directly back to the center, so that as a researcher, we did not get access to the initial data come back. We wanted the information on the backside. As a part of that, initially we were focused on 3 pillars, that being trust and legitimacy, which is pillar 1, pillar 2, which is policies and procedures, and then pillar 4, which was community policing and crime reduction. The organization came back to us as we started this review. Noble came back to us and asked us to include training and education, which was pillar 5, as a part of the body of work that we were doing. None of this work and our achievements that we received could have been achieved without the great support we received from alumni from Walden University, some folks at Noble itself, as well as with the Institute. We had approximately 22 PhDs affiliated with Walden and others that came to, and we broke them down into teams to look at each of those 3 pillars initially, ultimately 4 pillars. And from that, they could do some analysis, some initial analysis relative to the issues of policing and what the themes that were coming out of those different pillars. So what were some of those themes? Now, one of the things we recognized very early on when we were able to get our hands on the transcripts from that body of work that was a part of the 21st century policing report was that there really was no definitional links for certain concepts or certain themes. So when you're talking about trust, you're talking about legitimacy, you're talking about procedure. What do those terms mean, both as an organization as well as to the CEOs themselves? And from that, like I said, those surveys that you see the results on the screen from, they were helping us define what some of those concepts and themes meant. So we then distributed, as I said, to the membership so that we could get the results that you're seeing on this slide. The next slide, please. So what were some of our achievements from this body of work that we involved on? Well, we conducted, like I said, when we broke them down into teams, we asked them to conduct a qualitative content analysis of that 21st century report, the final report, and the notes. And like I said, we had the benefit of having a significant amount of notes and transcripts from each of those individual sessions that were used to formulate the report itself. We leveraged the relationship of Noble to get our hands on those notes. We contacted the individuals that had them, and they provided those transcripts over to them. So those transcripts were then provided to each of the individual teams so that they could develop their report. Upon the completion of their work, Dr. Benet and I then took a look at their work and conducted an analysis, if you would, against all of those various themes in alignment with the individual, the various polarities of democracy value sets. As a part of that work, we were able to complete a report to Noble. And this report was disseminated at their annual conference. Dr. Benet and I did a presentation on the results of the report in August of last year at Noble's annual conference. And what was also, and the body of work that we did, we were also able to actually somewhat triangulate it, if you would, with a couple of other reports that Noble had done during the year on reimagining policing in America. So we were able to provide some examples of how the Polarities of Democracy approach supports the various recommendations of the 21st Century Policing Report. There was an implementation report that was separate from the main report that was done by the commission that did the work. And we were able to provide several examples, if you would, from each of the Polarities of Democracy value set pairs against an alignment to those various recommendations. And we identified some of both the positive as well as the negative aspects, if you would, that might be associated with each of those pairs within the Polarities of Democracy. That's not to say that there aren't additional positive and negatives, but we did give the organization a great starting point, if you would, that can be used to address this issue. Also, Dr. Benet and I were able to formulate and develop a journal article on the body of work that was done as a part of that. And that journal article, for those that are interested, is published in Walden's Journal of Social Change. Next slide, please. So where are we at and where are we headed? Very recently, Dr. Benet and I, as part of an initiative that was being conducted by the National Academies of Science through the State Departments with INL, we were able to make a presentation as a body of work to that body on policing and democracy. And that's looking at democratic systems around the world, not just in the United States. But we were able to present with them how the Polarities of Democracy aligns with those types of efforts that they're doing. We're also currently working on what is known as the next phase of this. We're looking at Pillar 2, which deals with policies and procedures. And specifically within that, we're taking a look at civilian police oversight agencies. We've recently received notification from Noble that this will be one of these sessions, workshop sessions at their workshop. So right now there's a survey, again, that's been supported by Walden University Center for Social Change, and that it's going out, it has gone out and been distributed to Noble's executives. And we're only gonna, that initiative in Pillar 2 will only go to the CEOs within the organization for that response. And our goal would be, again, at the annual conference, which is in July, to have the data back so that we can again approach the Polarities of Democracy value sets against this issue of civilian police oversight agencies, and we'll report it out at Noble. We've also made a conference submittal to the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is IACP, on your screen here, for similar presentation to be conducted at their conference in October. And we're just waiting to hear as to whether or not that will come. And again, as a part of the body of work that we do, we will develop a journal article. Dr. Jacqueline Smith, who is an alumni of Walden University and the School of Criminal Justice, is working on that aspect of that initiative, and she'll be very instrumental in helping formulate that journal article. So I was trying to run through this very briefly because we have a limited short amount of time for the presentation today, to give you a very global perspective and view of what the initiative was about, how we approached it, and some of the achievements that we developed. From that body of work for departments and municipalities that are interested, we will be in a position to assist and aid them in the formulation and seeing what their departments, their municipalities might be looking like as it relates with the values of good policing in a democratic society. A lot of that be done through listening sessions, and we welcome those opportunities as they may very well present themselves. So with that, I will turn it back over to the moderators so that if there are any particular questions that you may have for Dr. Benet or myself, that in our last 5 or 6, 7 minutes here we've got, that we can answer them. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Benet and Dr. McMillan, for this presenting this fascinating work and all of your research and the impact it's already had. Feel free to type your questions or comments in the chat. And we have several minutes that we can address all of your questions. Once again, any comments, questions, or feedback for Dr. Benet or Dr. McMillan, feel free to type them in the chat. There's a question in the chat. Where can I get more information on the polarities of democracy?
Well, you can first contact either Dr. McMillan or myself. We are both professors at Walden. And so it's joseph.mcmillan@mail.waldenu.edu or william.benet@mail.waldenu.edu. Or you can go to the Institute for Polarities of Democracy. We have a website. And also the Walden Library, and certainly if you contact me, when I respond to you, my signature block has 2 links in it. And the first link is to the Institute's Polarities of Democracy website, but the other is to the Walden Library, where they've created a Polarities of Democracy collection. And the Polarities of Democracy collection includes all of the research that's been done at Walden University on polarities of democracy. And as I said, there is 19 completed dissertations so far. And in the next few years, we're right in the process now. All of our work so far has been within the School of Public Policy and Administration. But in the next few years, we are in the process of rolling out the theory of polarities democracy across all the schools and colleges in the university. Dr. Keisha Walker from the Riley School of Education is leading that effort. And we have a number of other faculty members that are deeply involved with that process of rolling that out.
Wonderful. There's a few more questions in the chat. What is the best way to create an outreach?
I think I'll take that one, Dr. Benet. As it relates with how we would use this approach, we would work with a municipality and our police department. And I've found professionally, having individuals on the ground in those areas that have these types of concerns, and this has been used, polarity thinking and polarity management has been used in a variety of scenarios, domestically as well as internationally. So there's some templates there on listening sessions, facilitated conversation. There's some strategies that we would do in mapping as to what does this look like when you're talking about justice and due process. What are the positive and negative aspects in those communities? So it would literally be reaching out to those or having communities reach out to us and say that they are interested in this, and we're definitely interested in working with communities and bringing this type of a concept to their areas to help reimagine policing in America. So it's through facilitated conversations, I think, is the best way to approach the situation, because the community has to be involved in the formulation of the strategies. And from a policing standpoint, there's a perspective, but definitely from a community perspective, from a community standpoint, there's a perspective. And it's best when you bring everybody together in that room, using the faith-based community, using activists, using practitioners to drill into the issues of those specific communities, that you see the value of how something powerful when we're talking about a democratic society in this industry of policing. And while we're looking at it in policing, there are other elements. Our anti-racism initiative actually covers other areas beyond the policing industry itself. But definitely for our focus here, and I always want to correct Dr. Benet with regards to public policy. I was in the School of Criminal Justice when I finished my dissertation. So there's 2 schools, in fact, that have used the theory. So I'm looking forward to more being done. Thank you.
Yes, and we can certainly post some of the links to the resources that they've mentioned within the session catalog also. So if you just click on that session, we'll post the resources out there. And I think that was leading into another question in the chat: how can one get more involved?
Yeah, there are a number of ways to be involved. As Dr. McMillan was just saying, we hopefully over the next 5 to 10 years, we will be rolling this out across communities across the United States. So that's one whole component, the noble partnership that we're engaged with. At the same time, we're also involved with Walden University, introducing the theory across all of the schools and colleges in the university. So we need a lot of volunteers and participants there. In addition, we have 2 other components to the anti-racism initiative. One is to develop an advocacy agenda for those ways in which we need to address disparities that are caused by structural racism or structural paternalism, or all of the problems that cause disparities, racial and disparities across America. And we will be rolling that out over the next 5 to 10 years. And our 4th component is looking at specifically all of those ways in which we can take the theory and put it into practice to make it available to organizations or communities that are interested in transforming themselves to become more consistent with democratic practice.
Wonderful, and lots of compliments in the chat about your work. It's fascinating, and everyone has really enjoyed the presentation, and certainly you've already made a huge impact, and we look forward to the future as well. So thank you so much for sharing all of your work. And again, we'll post those links in the session catalog. So be sure to return to the session catalog to access some additional information. And I see that Dr. Benet also posted his email in the chat. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Our honor to be here today.